Right. No. Come on. The thing is, sometimes it starts before this. And I'm just doing this at the beginning of the. Why is it so slow? Right, I'm just waiting for the red light to come on. It's really annoying.
Just do this on your phone, sir?
Because it takes a lot of. It would take a lot of memory up on my phone. Whilst if I do it from here, do you know what? I think I've got too many tabs up. Oh no, it's recording now. Lovely. Okay, so I've got an infographic for the Kronstadt Uprising of March 1921. It's quite interesting actually, because even the naming of it could be controversial. Because if you were a what we call a tanky, so which is kind of like a Stalinist and Leninist loyalist to those regimes, they would say it was the Kronstadt Mutiny, which is what the Bolsheviks tried to paint it as, and that should remind you of something on the other side because British Empire. You've got the Indian Mutiny, haven't you? So the British people call it Indian Mutiny. In India, they call it the first genuine uprising. So anyway, what's in a name, eh? So just going through this quickly. Let's get some things on the board. Right, so yeah, let's get this here and I'll get the mouse up there. Lovely. So Kronstadt sayers were completely important to the very first revolution. I believe that the Kronstadt sayers shot something from a ship which signalled the start of the revolution as well. So when we say they're instrumental, we can't really overstate how instrumental they are. They were the solid, loyal base, and they had effectively been very well versed in Marxist theory. I'm not saying they were at the level of Lenin and Trotsky, but they had a good understanding of what the tenets of Marxism were through reading communist newspapers. So quite an interesting group, really, of genuinely working class people. Now, this isn't a genuine this is not a genuine poster from the time. All right, that's actually a World War II poster from Britain. But I think the message corresponds to effectively what happened. So war communism brought on by the Russian Civil War had reduced bread rations for those sailors. And it's quite strange, actually, because this requisitioning was there to fundamentally feed the Red Army. But of course, these Kronstadt sailors are on that base. They're not going across the Soviet Union and fighting the whites. They're just there. So obviously, that Red Army that are doing the fighting would have got the principal bread rations. And in Leningrad or St. Petersburg, whatever you want to call it, that was obviously where grain would have been directed to, and obviously Moscow. So the cities were obviously very important because that's where Bolshevik, as the Bolsheviks support base. I will say, actually, I think Lenin kind of took these for granted, and it was a very dawning realization for Lenin when this uprising happened. He realized that he needed to change, and by the end of this infographic, you'll see the changes that he put in place. Now, what's really important to this is the theory, okay? Marxist theory, because you've got vanguard theory, which is that there should be a very narrow base upon which the Bolsheviks essentially had their revolution, okay? So you've got a very small bunch of dedicated revolutionaries who caused the revolution, and then you have the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is, again, this is a Leninist interpretation of Marxism. So when a revolution happens, you need to secure it, and you do this through the dictatorship of the proletariat, where you have a very authoritarian state. Now, this puts Marxism-Leninism very much in an antagonistic region to a more anarchist, and there's another group called the Maximalists as well, and even the Mensheviks as well. So what you find is, okay, the left is not united, and whilst you had like the social revolutionaries and Mensheviks, and you got these anarchists, and they all joined in this this revolution, and they're excited to join in with it. What you quickly find out is once the Bolsheviks attain power, that these become their enemies. Former allies become enemies. So it's quite interesting there. Now, obviously, an anarchist doesn't believe in having a state. So if you've got Lenin, who's advocating for a very strong and authoritarian state, well, then they're going to completely fall out with anarchists. They just have contradictory beliefs. So there's that. So just so you know, the workers in Petrograd or St. Petersburg or Leningrad, like however you want to call it, they were also involved over a series of strikes, okay, when it's coming out to this time, over reduced bread rations. Now, we've got to remember why there was those reduced bread rations, and we've talked about it in the Do Now, and that's because of the Civil War, okay? you think about the peasantry; they were decimated. You know that war encompassed all of the Soviet Union pretty much, and so therefore all those there's a lot of peasants that are simply that are killed or refugees, you know, trying to get away from war, and that's going to upset essentially the, if you want to call it the breadbasket, but their ability to make bread in the Soviet Union. So that's why bread rations are so low. Okay, it's really, really important. So basically what happens is that there's, I don't know if I can pronounce this correctly. Okay, so let's get the rest of this on this slide here. Okay, you get the Petropavlosvk Resolution. Now this is really interesting. Okay, essentially he's the de facto leader of the Kronstadt Uprising, and he comes out with some really good ideas, challenging Bolshevik supremacy and rule, and challenging this really authoritarian state, and he compares it to the very worst elements of the Tsarist regime, and he calls for kind of like the original ethos of the revolution: peace, land, and bread. Like that's what we've been promised, and we haven't got any of it. We've got peace. There's been a civil war. There's then been the Russo-Polish war. Okay, the land. Okay, there's been some very careful, very kind of lawyer-esque wording around that. So whilst the peasants own the land, they don't own the grain. So what's the point in owning the land if you don't own the grain? So he kind of calls for a more pure form of revolution. He doesn't want the Bolsheviks in power anymore. Now, so the Bolsheviks get a bit worried, and they send old Kalinin in to kind of quell this and calm things down. And they kind of boo him. No, we don't agree with you, Kalinin. But they missed an opportunity. Because Kalinin's quite an interesting character in the Soviet Union, because he occupies high positions in office, and yet he's a bit of a non-entity. Okay. However, he is an old Bolshevik, and he's one that he's such a non-entity that Stalin didn't actually purge him later on. He survives into old age, and they actually name a key city, Kaliningrad, after him as well. However, he's an old Bolshevik, and he does have that status. And there's numerous photos of him beside Lenin and Stalin. They're really important. So he's an important non-entity. I don't know how to quite qualify him and get my head around him, but they send him there to kind of quell this, and he doesn't quell it, and they don't take him hostage. Okay, they could have taken him hostage and used that, and they don't, because actually at this point it's not an uprising. Okay, they're just making complaints in a peaceful manner, and they were very, very careful not to be violent in their opposition to the Bolsheviks at the beginning. Okay, you could say the Bolshevik response is quite strong arm in response to this. So Trotsky's in no mood for collaborating with these guys, by the way, and you'll see this in the kind of the source as well. Trotsky denounces these Kronstadt sailors as not the sailors of the revolution. He says actually they're not the same people. He says what the Bolsheviks did was get those sailors, those Kronstadt sailors, and spread them across the Soviet Union, and effectively use them as like commissars within the Soviets. Okay, across the Soviet Union. So he says they're actually not one of the same people. I don't believe the entirety of that opinion is true. There is like an element of truth to that, but not in the absolute way that he tries to vindicate his position of butchering these poor sailors. So I don't quite agree with it. So basically, what he does, he gives the Kronstadt sailors a deadline and says, "Look, okay, you've got to stop what you're doing. You've got to support the Bolshevik regime, and you've got to let us come and reorganize what's going on in Kronstadt." And the Kronstadt sailors are like, "No." Okay, so there's a very they missed that deadline on the 7th of March, and really then it becomes violent. Okay, so we've got a familiar face here. Okay, we've got a familiar face. So sorry, John, I'll just go the ways there. So we've got Tutuchevsky. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. So he becomes quite important within the USSR later, especially in the Russo-Finnish War, I believe. Yeah. So he's a prominent young commander. He takes command of the army, and 60,000 troops attack. And I tell you, I haven't put the details of the weapons because there's too many. But both sides, the Kronstadt sailors, have a load of machine guns. Of course they do. They're the Baltic Fleet. Yeah, you're literally attacking a Baltic fleet of sailors, so they're very well armed. But so are the Red Army. Okay, so it's going to be a very interesting conflict. Now, what I find interesting about this is that the Red Army are literally skating on thin ice. Okay, the ice was thin, so they're trying to get to the Baltic Fleet and invade, and some of these guys were literally falling through the ice as it was happening. Also, their uniforms were completely the wrong colour. Okay, because they weren't camouflaged They weren't camouflaged, and really, you got to go for nighttime attacks, okay, to make it successful. So their first attack kind of fails. So on March the 16th, they regroup, and then they attack from both the north and the south. Okay, they attack from both sides, and it isn't easy. I'm just going to be very honest with you. There's quite a lot of horrible hand-to-hand fighting, and there's quite a lot of losses as well on both sides. All right, but essentially, the Red Army finally get into Kronstadt. They breach the defences, they breach the walls, they get in, and the fighting is very, very violent, hand-to-hand fighting. All right, when that Red Army gets inside that Kronstadt base, okay? And finally, well, obviously, the Red Army wins. Otherwise, we'll be teaching a completely different history with me. So, faced with the prospect of summary execution, 8,000 Kronstadt refugees, they go into Finland, you know, because they know how the Bolsheviks are going to deal with them. And they just go and live in Finland. Actually, one of the key leaders of the Kronstadt sailors, he lives in Finland. And then when the Russo-Finnish war kicks off, Stalin gets him and puts him in a gulag, and he dies quickly as well. So like it was a long remembered enmity. Yeah, Stalin didn't forget, man. Stalin was not a forgiving figure. He's not Jesus. He is Stalin. Right. Okay. Right. So, right. Basically, you know what happens. A lot of these Kronstadt sailors, a lot of them are summarily executed. Okay, a lot of them are taken to gulags and quickly perish. They're dealt with very, very harshly. The Bolsheviks then put loyal Bolshevik leaders in charge of them, and they root out anyone who was supporting the Kronstadt like complaints and uprising. So what's interesting for me is the conclusion. I know it's only a small part here, but it's really important. And there's two main things that I drew in conclusion to the Kronstadt Uprising, and it was this, okay? Lenin consolidated his party's power, okay, Bolshevik power in the Soviet Union, and destroyed left opposition. So Mensheviks, anarchists, maximalists, all these kind of left opposition figures, they were driven out of the Soviet Union. They were either made to leave, or if they refused to leave, they would have been put in gulags. Okay, so he makes this left opposition leave. These are kind of like almost early Trotsky type figures, aren't they? Really? Okay, like left wing emigres who want a purity of revolution. They're driven out of the Soviet Union, but he's not stupid. Okay, Lenin is not a stupid man. He's not famous in history for being stupid. He's actually famous for making the correct decisions about revolution at the right time. Okay, he realized time was right for revolution. He was the one who realized, like, it's now. We've got to do it now. Okay, he drives the revolution forward. So he realizes that war communism is creating a lot of problems in the country. Okay, and he realizes actually, according to Marxist stage theory, we're going to have to do this more slowly. All right, so we're going to have to accept the bitter pill of the new economic plan, which is essentially a little bit of capitalism. Okay, which is a more capitalist way of operating the Soviet Union for now as a temporary measure, because the Soviet Union has been plagued by civil war, violence, like famine. We need to address this. Okay, we can't institute a communist system just like that. It will take time to embed. So he was willing to do things slowly. Okay, so he adopts the NEP kind of as a consequence to this. So I find his reflective nature quite interesting. Okay, I'm going to get hard on my enemies, but I'm actually going to eradicate these social economic conditions which are creating opposition. All right, so I find that quite an intelligent move. And that essentially is the Kronstadt Uprising. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording now, and I'll upload that to YouTube very soon.